And this is Blockchain Wars. Today we're going to talk about network security and keeping your Bitcoin safe. So I'll give you an update on the state of the network and the state of the economy. Right now Bitcoin is at $9,082 and the price has pretty much been flatlined for about 2 days. So we're at a 10% down for the day, 6% down for the week, and 5% up for the month. So we're still recovering from the Mt. Gox sell-off from the custodial holder of Mt. Gox's coins to pay back all the customers that lost their coins back in 2012 and 13. And right now Bitcoin is still illegal in 9 different countries, and nothing has changed there in the last couple months, so I'm just going to keep an eye on that consistently. Right now we are at 1,342 Bitcoin core nodes, which is the backbone of the Bitcoin network, and collectively we're about 12,000 nodes with 12 different reference clients. So basically we're up about 400 or 500 nodes from last week, so that's pretty good. And today we have some news that's pretty important to the Bitcoin space and maybe the world as a whole. We have Square Cash, which is one of the first apps to start using Bitcoin in the mainstream. And today Square Cash is seeking to file for the BitLicense in New York City, where a lot of the Bitcoin community has kind of left this environment because the BitLicense is this regulatory agreement made by the New York City financial departments to make a very expensive license needed to run any Bitcoin business. And if you're a Bitcoin trader or user, you know that many of the exchanges have already blacklisted you if you're in New York City under an IP address. So this would actually bring a lot of customers to the brand new Cash App, which is run by Square. It just became a Bitcoin tool to buy and sell Bitcoin. And from my personal experience, the user interface, very easy to use, very simple to understand, a lot better experience than Coinbase or BitPay or any of the other big companies that have been pushing Bitcoin to the mainstream. But there's some issues there with that license, and it's pushed out a lot of the small businesses in New York from accepting Bitcoin. All the mom and pop shops and small food carts and restaurants that used to use Bitcoin back in the day are kind of exempt from that because it's so expensive. So that's something we should do a little bit of discussion about in the future on if the BitLicense is important and if it's actually needed, and if these big companies supporting it are actually harming Bitcoin or benefiting. So that's something I'd like to think about a little more. Another important news story that happens, and not necessarily related to Bitcoin, but we just had Mr. Stephen Hawking pass away. And if you don't know who Stephen William Hawking is, he's one of the first men to describe how black holes work and explain how the mechanics of a black hole would work so that we can actually see if black holes exist. So he's one of the most important physicists in our lifetime, and he just died apparently a few hours ago. So I want to say condolences to him and his family and everyone around him who supported him, and his important science really helped a lot of society. A lot of mathematicians and physicists realize that even a debilitating disease like that could take your body, the same way we've seen some of the characters in Bitcoin lose their body to debilitating diseases, that doesn't even stop the mind from functioning and thinking abstractly. So we want to thank him and wish him off to the universe in great peace. And that's a kind of a shame that we lost one of our physicists today, but as a man that said he believed in physics, he's radiating out into the universe now, and he's free in the universe. And I just want to say that that's an important thing that just happened. Another important thing that happened today is our President Trump fired T-Rex, our ex-oil man who was running the Secretary of State, and they weren't really friends, so that was kind of expected. When you call the president an idiot and you don't apologize for it, you're probably not going to keep your job. And the interesting part there is the CIA director, Mr. Pompeo, became the Secretary of State. So whatever your views are of the CIA, officially the CIA has now got one of their own in charge of the Secretary of State and State Department. So that's an interesting change. And we also have a new director of the CIA, and her name is Gina Haspel. And Gina Haspel is important to a lot of CIA happenings in regards to renditions and waterboarding and a lot of the interrogation programs that were created. So she's not necessarily been approved and picked by Congress, but you can expect those conversations to happen. And a lot of questions on regards to the morality of how the CIA functions. And I think these are very important to Bitcoin because if either of these two characters utter the word Bitcoin out of their mouths in regards to the State Department or the CIA, these are going to be people who are going to have big roles in regards to the government acting on regulation, acting on approval, and acting on Bitcoin being used by non-state actors, state actors, foreign friends, and foreign enemies. So I think that's important to know who's in charge of these departments of our government and where they came from and what they plan on doing, because eventually everything they sign into paper will affect us Bitcoin users. And one more important story I want to talk about, which is really important to the Nevada environment here, is that Bitcoin has been tax exempt in Nevada for many months now. And one of the things that's not really advertised about that is the effect upon the local economy. And as of today, there are strip clubs, casinos, hotels, restaurants, entertainment places like the Zip Line, and we may even have a new zoo built in San Diego, or actually in Las Vegas soon. So if that's a possibility, there's plenty of opportunity for new businesses and old businesses in Nevada to start accepting Bitcoin in this tax-free state environment. And cities, counties, and the state itself are exempt from adding any kind of tax on not just Bitcoin, but all cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. So as a Nevadian, I think this is a great situation for our state and our county and our city, and I want that to be a little more advertised so that we can have more influence in regards to people knowing that they can accept Bitcoin and that there's actual benefits to doing that. So these kind of news stories are really important to Bitcoin today because we're in a global space and we're having a global effect with Bitcoin, and now we're going to have global characters coming and going, and we need to know what they're doing with Bitcoin. And I think what they plan on doing with not just money, not just control, but also the rules of war and how Bitcoin lays into that landscape. So one thing I really want to bring out today and talk about in this episode is keeping yourself safe, what we call operational security, or OpSec. And OpSec is really important to not just a Bitcoin user, not an internet user, but basically anyone that functions on Earth should have some form of operational security. And what that really means is how you function, how you operate, how you interact with other people, interact with machines, and basically communicate in the public. Your operations are how you spend your money in regards to Bitcoin, how you tell someone you have Bitcoin, how you inform someone you're going to pay with Bitcoin. If, as an example, you're in a restaurant that takes Bitcoin and you break your phone out and you open up your Bitcoin wallet and everyone in the restaurant sees you with your Bitcoin wallet, and you're in a place with cameras, now your cameras can see your Bitcoin wallet, and you're recording basically how much money you have in your possession. These are the kind of things you need to think about when you're using Bitcoin in the public, or even using Bitcoin in your home on your computer in private. Because the way you transact, it basically publicizes what we call the UTXO, which is your transactions inputs and your transactions outputs. So one example is if someone has been holding Bitcoin for a long time, like in the hardware wallet, in their phone, or on a piece of paper like a paper wallet, cold storage, most of the people that hold Bitcoin never touch it. just sits there. They're just waiting for the infinite price when the Bitcoin is worth $1 million. Now, we had something recently happen to Bitcoin networks, which is the fork. Bitcoin forks, actually it's forked many times, but we've had a lot of public forks recently. And with the value being where it is, when the Bitcoin network forks, a new token is created with the same amount of Bitcoin you have in the wallet separated to a second address. So as an example, if you had 100 Bitcoin in your hardware wallet and you had those coins there when Bitcoin Cash forked off, you would now have 100 Bitcoin Cash tokens in the wallet as well on a separated address. And one of the problems with the operational security is if you wanted to sell those Bitcoin Cash tokens, you would spend those on an exchange, but without moving your original Bitcoin tokens, you would break your transactions and possibly lose those coins. Now, what people did is they waited for the fork, they took their Bitcoin and they sent it to a different address, and then they took the Bitcoin Cash, sent it to an exchange, and sold it off. Now, if someone has never spent their Bitcoin on their address, this could be considered a vector attack to see who owns those Bitcoins. Because if those Bitcoins have never moved, it's really hard to tell who has them. But if those Bitcoins move to another address, and that address is somehow connected to an IP address, a phone number, a MAC number, if they're seen in public moving, the forensics of finding who owns those Bitcoins is now much easier, more details are exposed, and basically your privacy or your UTXO is removed. We don't want to see those kind of activities for people who want to keep their money private. But the incentive of new tokens and profit that you can make more Bitcoin has driven a lot of coins that we can say are sitting for many Bitcoin days, which is basically coins not moving. How many days have they not moved? And if the coins move for the first time, it kind of exposes your identity somewhat in cyberspace. So this is something I want to teach about. If you want to use your Bitcoin for just hoarding and keeping it safe for your future, for your children, for some investment in the long run, you basically put Bitcoin in a wallet and never want to touch it. But the incentives of motivating you to move those coins might not outweigh giving up your identity. That's kind of the OpSec kind of decision you got to make. Do you want to make a bunch more Bitcoin, or do you want to give away who owns your Bitcoin? So I would say that if you don't understand how to keep your Bitcoin private fully from VPNs, virtual private networks, using Tor, the onion router to hide your IP addresses, and in regards to mixing services or converting to Monero, which is a very anonymous currency, and then selling that back to Bitcoin, there's plenty of schemes that have kept your privacy in regards to the blockchain and how to get away from forensic tools trying to find out who owns or uses this Bitcoin. But we're going to deal with what's called fungibility. One of the rules that Aristotle defined money has to be fungible. Now, if I spend one Bitcoin and it's worth this much, and someone next to me spends this Bitcoin, it's worth the same, but now my Bitcoin address is blacklisted. The store does not want my Bitcoin anymore. That's where fungibility breaks down, and the value of Bitcoin could break down. If everyone who is trying to buy porn or guns or weed or pay for some sex worker or all these nefarious things that money can be used for, when that happens, there may be institutions like Coinbase, BitPay, exchanges that don't want those activities to be connected to their wallets. They will start making whitelists of approved addresses and transactions and blacklists of disapproved transactions and addresses. And when that happens, that's when fungibility breaks down. So we don't want to see your coins basically being blacklisted by everyone who accepts Bitcoin because maybe they came from the Silk Road eventually. Maybe you bought coins from someone who bought coins from someone who bought coins from an ATM that sold Bitcoins to the ATM that came from the Silk Road. Now all those transactions are connected, and in the future, if someone blacklists any coins that ever touched the Silk Road, you basically lose your fungibility, and no matter how much money you spent on those Bitcoins or how much you think they're worth, they're now useless in regards to using them. And you need to think about how to make them not useless. So that's where we want to talk about keeping your Bitcoin safe, but also keeping your life safe. Because exposing your Bitcoin, which we've seen recently in the news, can be very detrimental to your life in regards to someone trying to kill you to take your Bitcoin. We've seen a lot of news stories about people putting guns to people's heads saying, send me your Bitcoin or I kill you, or give me your phone with all your Bitcoin or I'm going to harm your life. These are the situations where violence and warfare is going to really bleed into the cyberspace, and basically the pacifist people who want to use Bitcoin to get away from violence, especially bank violence, government violence in regards to money and taxes and things like that. You know, we know a lot of the taxes in the dollar are backed by nothing but violence, especially government sanctioned monopoly upon violence. But if someone knows you have Bitcoin and they know they can use violence against you to get them, that's where you have to start thinking about your security in regards to even telling anyone you have any Bitcoin, or using your Bitcoin in a way that no one knows it's you. Because it's not about hiding money from the government, it's not about refusal of taxes. Ooh, lost the camera. The real issue is not exposing who you are and how much Bitcoin you have to the public. If Bitcoin becomes a very prominent mainstream financial tool to the masses, all 9 billion humans on Earth, the idea of keeping it private is going to be much more important than advertising your wealth to the world, especially if Bitcoin is something that you're going to use to buy your food, pay your rent, or maybe buy a gun. Now, what I want to teach is an idea that if you have Bitcoin, if you function in public, if you're trying to meet other Bitcoin people, you're trying to go to Bitcoin meetups, you're trying to find other like-minded Bitcoin people to talk about Bitcoin and express your ideas, you have to think like James Bond. You have to be very cautious on what you say, who you say it to, who knows who you are, who doesn't. We live in the internet with pseudonames and anonymous faces on Twitter and Facebook, and the real name policies of these companies really try to break that fungibility of not money, but fungibility of your identity. And that's one of the reasons we don't really have a voting system online, because no one knows who's who. And the identity and the internet ID and the truth of who you are online is really impossible to find out. You know, you could have 1 million people voting, or one person voting as 1 million people. It's really hard to figure that out in cyberspace and electronics. Now, those are the kind of things you need to think about if you're going to go online and advertise that you have Bitcoin, or go into the real world in a bar with a bunch of Bitcoin people and tell them you have Bitcoin. You're exposing not just your transactions, but your identity. And you need to keep not just your financial privacy and your fungibility there, you need to keep your fungibility and your privacy in regards to your identity. So no matter what Mark Zuckerberg says about putting your real name on Facebook, the rules are not set in that regards on the internet. And the walled gardens of Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon aren't the dictators of the laws of the internet. And originally the cypherpunk idea that encryption is a must and privacy is a must and cryptocurrencies is a must. We need to fight for those concepts and not give in to what is basically laziness and comfort zones, you know, to have a more convenient life. I don't want to misquote Ben Franklin, but it's those who give up liberty do not deserve it, I think. And if you give up your privacy or your identity, you may not have deserved your privacy and identity. And if you give up your location of your Bitcoin and someone takes it, you may not have deserved it in the first place. You have to be very diligent on what you expose, who you expose it to, and why you're exposing anything in the first place. So if you don't understand how to keep your money safe and how to keep your life safe and your identity safe, I recommend everyone study operational security. OpSec is the term. And we'll talk a lot more about different type of securities like application security, information security, financial security. These terms need to kind of be embedded in your brain as a normal way of functioning. Like, if you're James Bond, you follow this set of rules. When you're out there being a spy, you act this way. You act upon your burner phones and your fake identities and your new cars every day so no one finds you. You know, that kind of spy character has to follow operational security. And unfortunately, we all have to follow those same lines of operational security if you're using Bitcoin in any way, or you're using your identity online in any way. So that's important in regards to keeping your life safe and keeping your money safe. And you need to be creative and think about the different ways you can do that, because no one sets the rules on what's safe and what's secure. You basically have to redefine what you think is safe and secure and act upon that in your own regards. Because the way I act in regards to my money and my identity is absolutely no way anyone else should act in regards to their identity and money. You got to find your own rules to follow. Just whatever rules you make up, make sure you follow them. You know, we have tools like Signal and Telegraph and Confide and a lot of apps that allow you to communicate in privacy and encrypted tools, end-to-end encryption. But in the future, you might just want to say everything on the blockchain so it's public forever so no one can tell you you're a liar. And it might be more operational security than keeping everything private. You know, records are important, and a lot of the people think that keeping everything encrypted and secret is the best way. That's not necessarily my philosophy, but it works for a lot of people. So there's different ways on how to be secure, and you need to think about that in regards to yourself, your children, your family, your coworkers, anyone you ever connect Bitcoin to in any way, because you're not just exposing yourself, you're exposing everyone else you interact with. And you don't want to be paranoid in public or online, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean someone's trying to take you down and take your money and find out who you are. So you gotta be on alert in that regards. Your identity is your access to the world, including your money in the future. I mean, I could take a piece of Play-Doh on your phone and steal your fingerprint. So maybe you don't want to put your fingerprints everywhere, and maybe you want to have some backup on your phone that your fingerprints aren't the only way to get in there. There's a lot of operational security methods that you can think of, and you could spend hours and days on how to keep yourself safe. But I just want to burn that into the masses' brain that operational security is the first rule of functioning in cyberspace. And really, like, this show is supposed to be almost a boot camp for cyberspace, because there's going to be a lot of things you need to learn if you want to function safely in cyberspace or on the blockchain. So I'll leave it at that, and I want to make sure everyone follows us on Twitter and Facebook. We're on DTube and Google and the social networks, which aren't necessarily the safest places. You need to function fully on OpSec in all of those places. You know, there's a lot of anonymous people on Twitter that we call crypto Twitter. You don't know who half those people are, but most of those people are keeping their identities safe in the best way possible. But I think that'll change in the future, especially with what we could call digital cyber ghettos like Facebook and Apple and Google that will lock you into a corner and you'll be stuck there. And if you want to function, you need to show who you are and how much money you have. Now, we don't want to live like that on cyberspace. So to the developers and the builders of cyberspace, you need to function on OpSecurity, but you also need to embed OpSec into your user interfaces, into the products you build, into the services you're giving away, into your businesses, so that basically ignorant customers are already protected. Because you can't teach this to everyone, but you can build an internet that has this embedded in it, the idea of operational security. We can build better systems that are just secure from the ground up by removing identity and removing transaction identity. and keeping fungibility alive. Because like Aristotle said, money is useless without fungibility. And we don't want to lose Bitcoin's value because everyone who's using it becomes identified immediately. That's one of the first things that we thought in Bitcoin, is that it's anonymous and it's going to keep you safe from anyone knowing where your money is. But that's not true. It's more tracked than cash. So you gotta be smart and creative to be private, because this public network is supposed to be transparent. We're supposed to see everything so we know what's happening. So there's no funny business. And to remove your identity information from money is what Bitcoin's about. We don't want powers that be trying to attach your identity to everything, including your Bitcoin. So just keep that in mind, and remember that we're in a war, and you gotta prepare for who's gonna attack next and how they're gonna attack next. So next time we'll continue on teaching how different security methods can be brought, but that should be good for now. And I just want to say thank you everyone for following and listening, and goodbye. Camera falling.
Turning once again, and this time more generally, to the question of cryptocurrencies, I would observe that there's never been a period in all of these 7 years when we could boast that there was an absolute guarantee against other cryptocurrencies taking the place of Bitcoin. In the days before Bitcoin, of which I was speaking just now, the same wind which would have carried funds across the internet might have been blocked by PayPal. There has always been the chance, no matter the cause, that your funds would be frozen, and it is that chance which has excited and befooled the imagination of many gatekeepers and financial tyrants. Many are the tales that are told. We are assured that novel methods will be adopted, and when we see the originality of malice, the ingenuity of aggression which our enemy displays, we may certainly prepare ourselves for every kind of novel stratagem and every kind of brutal and treacherous maneuver. I think that no idea is so outlandish that it should not be considered and viewed with a searching, but at the same time with a steady eye. We must never forget the solid assurances of those against Bitcoin seeking to distract, confuse, and delay. I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend Bitcoin, to ride out the storm of scaling, and to outlive the menace of tyranny. At any rate, that is what we are going to do. That is the resolve of Bitcoin and every Bitcoiner as well. That is the will of Bitcoin and the internet itself. The Bitcoin empire and the future, linked together in their cause and their need, will defend to the death their native soil, the internet, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. Even though large tracts of blockchain and many an old famous alt chains have fallen or may fall, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight on the internet. We shall fight on YouTube and on Twitter. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in Bitcoin. We shall defend Bitcoin whatever the cost may be. We shall fight for Bitcoin on the beaches. We shall fight for Bitcoin on the landing grounds. We shall fight for Bitcoin in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight for Bitcoin in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, Bitcoin were subjugated and starving, then the Bitcoin empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the one true blockchain, the arbiter of truth, would carry on the struggle until, in God's time, Bitcoin, with all of its power and might, steps forward to rescue and transform the financial system. Bitcoin will endure. Bitcoin will never surrender. Join